The opening sequence of episode 50, much like the previous episode, is another case of Armin's narration mixing together very practical recap with a whole bunch of recontextualizing of what we already seen. All of which, of course, hits even harder knowing how this season and eventually entire story ends. And with that said, let us get right into overanalyzing. He opens with some basic exposition about the territory they lost with the fall of Maria, with us then seeing all the refugees. I think this sorta mirrors the migrant camps of Marley as well as the refugee camps after the rumbling. Different battles, same story. It is the innocent people who actually get caught in the crossfire. And on that note, the next scenes we get are of Eren, with him proclaiming that he'd wipe out everything as we focus on his super detailed eye. This is where that narrator angle really kicks into high gear, because the way Armin phrases this is deliberately separating the monstrous founding titan Eren from that innocent boy who himself faced down other monsters. And even more importantly, when Armin talks about that boy who took the blade within his heart, we first see just his empty fist that only then fades into the knife as the world blacks out around him. This is of course the cabin sequence, but thematically, just like we'd hear in the rumbling OP, I think it tells us that Eren never wanted to grab a knife. He only took it because it was the world that darkened all around him. He then goes on to talk about bringing down a massive titan whose head collided with the ground. The visual we see is Mikasa, the story he tells is the cabin, but in reality, I think you could even take it to be the Colossal. Because, it's literally the most massive titan and Eren would bring it down very, very shortly. Or on the other hand, you could just take it to actually be Mikasa, since Mikasa fights for Eren and Eren is the one who got her up. Up to you really, but the goal of this speech I think is just to establish this boy as a hero of humanity. And to continue on that angle of separating these two Erens, he then asks, what did that boy inspire in humanity? Saying for some, it was pride, others, hope, but others still cried out in anger, as we see none other than Eren himself. I've talked about this ad nauseum already, but I think this again just captures that paradox that is the founding titan. There is the boy who grabbed a knife and fought to liberate humanity, but there is also the boy who quite literally embodies the hatred and sins of the past generations. That is the founding titan, this impossible reality where both of those things exist within the same person. And so, in the story that Armin would tell the world after the rumbling, he talks about this boy who brought hope to the walls, but he never names him, because that same boy is also their biggest monster. Armin knows that in those days, he never wanted to grab that knife, and that it was his best friend Eren, the friend who saved him time and time again. But at the same time, the world could never see that, and so he remains just a nameless boy. And of course, the whole daggers in your eyes from Keith also ties into everything we see here. That innocent boy is Carla's baby who is special for the simple reason of having been born. But that boy grabbing the knife is those daggers that Keith described within Grisha. But okay, I got one more, because the nameless boy could rather be a symbol for Eren, Mikasa, and Armin all rolled into one. Armin's book was the thing that got Eren to fight, but it was also Mikasa being kidnapped that got Eren to fight. But it was Mikasa's love for Eren that got Mikasa to fight, and it was Eren's bravery that got Armin to fight. Eren is that connective thread, but in this story that the world must hear, all of them are sort of one. On one hand, all of them are heroes of humanity, but on the other, all of them are devils of paradis. And the music here, oh boy! This is one of the newer tracks in the series, but I absolutely love the sheer emotional spectrum that we see throughout this opening. We go from that acoustic guitar and this uneasy pulse to these almost sorrowful and regretful vocals.
もう生きてはいけないのだと。あるものは誇りを、あるものは希望を。では、ウォールマリアを奪還。
And to immediately follow up on that, Armin asks whether humanity would finally realize that they are the authors of their own fates. Purely on a surface level, considering this is the last push toward reaching the sea and reclaiming the entirety of Paradis, it is just a nice speech to sort of hype us up. But more broadly speaking, I think it perfectly encompasses a lot of Attack on Titan's themes and the often self-contradictory nature of said themes. Just like that nameless heroic boy turned into a monster, this whole sentiment of them being authors of their own fates is also sort of dubious. Time and time again, we've seen, and will continue to see, how this entire war is almost entirely inherited. The people that are a part of it are either forced into it or have simply been molded into these perfect soldiers. In which case, are they really the authors of their own fates? But okay, before we move on, I think I need to reiterate that all of that is a recap sequence. Can someone please explain, how does Attack on Titan have more nuance in a recap sequence than like 70% of television? How did that happen? And this is not even me overanalyzing. The whole leaving Eren nameless, that's pretty on the nose. But anyway, we then move into the new opening, and yes, I've said this 100 times already, but I definitely plan on returning to all the OPs and EDs to analyze them separately, because just like the opening sequence, they are simply way too dense to unpack without spending like 20 more minutes on them. That said though, this one is relatively straightforward, mostly because it just has a lot of spoilers for the upcoming arc. The Season 2 one, of course, did have Eren and Reiner throwing down, but it also had fake scenes like the Colossal throwing the rocks and whatnot, which more so resemble Zeke. This one though, yeah, it just shows a whole lot. We get Armin waking up after acquiring the Titan, we see the Coffe gear that we already saw back in Utgard, so finally connecting those two events. We also see the Thunder Spears in action, but I think that's about it in terms of big spoilers. Oh, right, there's also that small thing of, literally Bertolt's nuke? But okay, I think that is actually it. Oh wait, what is this? Erwin standing with a bunch of people? What's so important about that? I don't really see anything. What do you mean they're all dead? But alright, aside from all the funny, goofy spoilers, I think the underlying themes in this one are super interesting, especially when you look at them in the context of the new ED. I think the overarching narrative of this OP is showing this dead and empty parody that is contrasted by the war that engulfs it. If you go frame by frame, those glitchy transitions are locations we know very well, but all of them are eerily empty. It sort of exploits that liminal space eeriness because with locations like the tree or Eren's house, we have never seen them be empty. Subconsciously, we know that something, someone is missing. So the natural question that arises is, what happens? Why are all of them entirely empty? And when you combine that with the ED that is all about this somber longing for the past, well, it paints a quite morbid outlook for this mission. A longing for the simpler times, empty buildings, and a war. I think if you combine those three things, you probably know the outcome. Yeah, the outcome is they're empty because probably everyone's dead. But one thing that I absolutely have to overanalyze is this frame right here. Before I say anything else, what do you see in this? Just an immediate gut check, don't think about it. Because my immediate thoughts was that this is the global allied fleet, and only then did I see that it's probably just the HQ and the walls. But considering the fact that the ocean has already been revealed, and the fact that Ymir and the rumbling has also already been revealed, I mean, all the puzzle pieces are already there, so I think there's a case to be made that this is indeed the fleet. Yes, I am well aware that it is definitely not. The title of the series is Overanalyzing. Let me overanalyze, okay? Though another line here that I think is super interesting is, we'll pursue our dreams even through hell and beyond. And that is paired with exclusively Eren, Zeke's Titans being summoned, Zeke himself, and within the glitches, we see the tip of the wall, Eren's home, and the HQ, all of which I think you can tie together as the main catalyst of the rumbling. And on a very similar note, it then asks, how much are you willing to give to bring them to fruition? A sweetly demonic voice demands that we pave a road of corpses to take us there, all of which is of course paired with Erwin. This ties into everything we talked about last time with him saying that confirming his father's beliefs is more important than humanity's victory. That selfish desire is that sweetly demonic voice, and Erwin would indeed pave a road of corpses. But on the other hand, there is also the give up on your dreams and die, so we'll leave all of that for when we actually get there. Right now, I think it's just neatly establishing those themes. There's also another interesting sequence here of Eren's eyes going to Ymir and the Devil of All Things, to the airship, to Armin's seashell, to Marley, to the basement, and of course, the rumbling. I think it establishes that tangled web of memories and events that eventually lead to the rumbling, as well as the duality within Eren, with us seeing both the purity that is Armin's seashell, as well as the hatred of past generations through Ymir and the hot air balloon. Another cool little sequence here that actually connects back to the first ED of the season is the "it would still be too early for the Requiem," with the visuals being a very similar drop of blood. But this time, it is not Kid Historia in this antiquated art style. This time, it is a soldier's boot in the present day as we then cut to Historia looking back, or recalling Ymir, and then Erwin standing with the dead. Much like with Historia never getting the time to properly mourn Ymir, for Erwin too, it would still be too early for Requiem. And the final thing we see in this one are two black birds, or more likely, crows. Which, of course, connects back to the second OP, where it was two white birds, and eventually the rumbling, where it is a bit of both. As with every other time in this series, as well as basically any series, Crows are pretty clearly used as an omen of death, everything from Eren waking up under the tree, to crows feasting on the dead, to the crows we see here. Things are about to get really bad, and this just signals that. Because this is a Linked Horizon OP, there are a whole bunch of other references to previous OPs, as well as the lyrics referencing the titles of the OPs themselves. For brevity's sake, we'll leave all of that for the inevitable overanalyzing OPs though. One last thing I want to say here is just that this shot right here is really cool. As for the title of the episode, The Town Where It All Began, you know what? I actually don't know why it's called that. I can't even begin to theorize why you'd call it that. Like, why is it called that? It must be some sort of weird plot hole, I don't know. Just in case anyone needs a little bit of clarification, I was being sarcastic. That was sarcasm. The episode is called that because the episode takes place in the town where... Moving into the episode itself, we open with the scouts super sneakily moving towards Shiganshina, with each and every one of them being cloaked and trying to avoid even speaking Eren's name. Unfortunately for them, it doesn't really amount to much, as we know that Peak is watching their movements basically the entire way. And this, I think, nicely summarizes what this mission is actually all about. Thus far, both the Marley squad as well as Erwin have approached their enemies with caution and precision. The female Titan arc was all about Erwin completely alone drawing up fake plans so that he alone can lure out the enemy. And that of course means that their preparations were also relatively light. I mean, no one except Erwin knew about the fake plans and no one really knew about the mission, right? And the same goes for the Marley squad. Instead of all three of them just popping off and nuking the entire mission into oblivion, Annie tried to strike precisely at Eren's position and just yoinking him. They didn't know what the Founding Titan is capable of, they still didn't even know that Eren has the Founding Titan, and they really didn't know what the King is up to. It was about precision, and it was about caution. After the events of Season 2 though, the gloves are very much off. Sure, there's a decent chance that they could have just tried ambushing the scouts right here, right now, in this forest. But the thing is, they know Erwin by now. What if Eren gets away solo, or what if he does some wacky Founding Titan stuff like he did at the end of Season 2? Kind of a bad idea, and so what they do is deliberately kite them into Shiganshina, and then just turn Shiganshina into a literal killing box. This is, quite literally, the nuclear option. Yeah, I know, it's not literally a nuke because the explosion isn't actually a nuke, it's just a big explosion, but it is a nuke, okay? And on the flip side again, the same goes for the scouts. The basement is the endgame. Whatever happens, they aim to finish this fight in Shiganshina. Even if they face a yet unknown enemy on the other side of all of this, the basement is kind of their end-all be-all. And speaking of yet unknown things, an interesting development that we see here are the Nighttime Titans, or as Hanji calls them, the Moonlight Titans. As Hanji notes, moonlight is just reflected sunlight, so if the moon were out, theoretically, the occasional Titan could still function with that tiny bit of light. In reality though, these quote-unquote new Titans they're describing are just Zeke's Titans who, for some reason, can move around regardless, just like we already saw back at Utgard. As for why that discrepancy exists between Zeke's Titans and just regular Titans, well, we don't really have a concrete answer, so I just write it down to the good old magic is magic and magic is cool, you don't need to explain everything. For some reason, pure Titans are slightly different from control Titans, why not? But the point I was making is that I really like that there are these theories that are entirely sound, but still based in incomplete information. These Moonlight Titans aren't some kind of new mutated type of Titan or anything like that, they're just the ones created by Zeke. I think it just adds a nice bit of realism that we see these weird things and we try to explain them based on what we know. It's a very small thing that seems obvious, but a lot of shows just want to give you the actual answer and don't really allow the characters in-universe to theorize about this. Keep this in mind because we see the exact inverse of this in this same episode with Armin. Also, we see their new lanterns, which of course come from the glowing crystal discovery. We get an eye-catcher about them later in the episode as well, but if you recall the torches we talked about back in Season 2, this is another case of technology developing based on these discoveries, which I think is just super cool from a realism sense. We then get a small conversation between Eren and Armin that I think very nicely encompasses that theme of perspective in this conflict. Eren realizes that he is trembling and obviously scared, but when Armin asks what's wrong, he just says that he's cold. Armin, on the other hand, with absolutely no shame, just says, "Oh, I'm terrified," then turning to ask whether Eren has ever really been afraid of the Titans. With how much we talk about these macro themes of perspective and both sides sort of being victims, yada yada, this is a very relatable human example of exactly that. Just like Armin assumes that Eren's projected confidence is what's actually going on in his head, I think this is something that all of us fall prey to. Expensive clothes, luxury brands, and status symbols are probably the easiest example. It's very easy to look at someone who's dressed very nicely or driving a nice car and assume that they're very well off. But in reality, a lot of research has shown that there is a very good chance that they're not well off at all. A lot of them might be spending an ungodly share of their income on said clothes or car or whatever else, and it might just stem from some sort of insecurity or appealing to status or even just plain anxiety-induced spending. It signals composure, while in reality, it is a mask to hide actual insecurity, just like Eren puts on a brave face here. I can't wait to read that one comment from a dude who spent $300 on a t-shirt trying to tell me that the shirt is very high quality and worth every penny and that I just don't understand anything. If it makes you happy, I really don't care. You can burn that money, but don't try and tell me it's not just that, burning money.
I feel very luxury. Frankie Risotto.
And this same dynamic would of course also play out in the final season. Eren might be this cold, expressionless figure just stumbling around, while in reality, we know that he is burning up on the inside. We also get some not really foreshadowing, but kind of foreshadowing with them recalling Eren saving Armin back in Trost, something we'd of course see again in Shiganshina. But the most important part here, I think, is Eren saying that he got up because of Armin's book. It wasn't strength or bravery or whatever else. It was hope, and it was a dream. Practically speaking, I think this is another point on the graph, if you will, to tell us as the audience that Armin must be the one who gets the syringe. Erwin has stated that he has no plan after this. Not only does Armin see a future past the basements, but Eren too desperately needs to cling on to that hope that only Armin can bring. And in terms of macro themes, I think Eren's "You were dreaming of bigger things, I never dreamed at all" very nicely connects to "Your dream, did it satisfy or terrify?" Is the duality that we see both in this season's narrative with the likes of Erwin, as well as within Eren and his entire story. Reaching the sea is the end, but it is also the beginning of something even greater. It is a victory, but it comes at a loss of so many, including Eren. It was Eren's dream, his only dream, but it was tainted and it became a nightmare. But on the complete flip side, I think you can also think of this as a question of what are we fighting for? As in, Eren thus far fought with this abstract goal of just killing all of their enemies. He never dreamed of anything bigger because there was a wall holding him back. Same for the Marley squad, they never got to be kids, they never got to truly live or dream. But for Armin, and this connects back to that bravery point, even in this very ugly world, he never lost hope and he never gave up on that dream of just seeing the sea. In a weird way, Armin is infinitely braver and infinitely more resilient than Eren. And so, we once again come back to that point of, without Armin's dream, there really is no Eren's dream. Without Eren, there is no Mikasa. The whole thing falls apart as soon as you remove one thing. And that piano, as they talk about how this time next year they'll be looking out at the sea, just hits so different.
来年の今頃、俺たちは海を見ているよ。
Obviously, there is that dimension of Armin briefly biting the dust, but it's more than that. It's that impossible dream of reaching the sea, again turning out to be yet another enemy we have to defeat. And importantly, as Mikasa notices that this is the hill they used to come to get firewood, we again see that duality of Armin and Mikasa. Armin constantly looks forward, he dreams of what comes next. Mikasa, on the other hand, is constantly looking back. She sees the hill, and she sees the memories upon that hill. And then we of course have Eren, the one who is perpetually in between. But alright, as we reach Shiganshina, the pacing of this episode, and really arc as a whole, just goes nuts. And is yet another brilliant showcase of Isayama's setting up these dominoes only to let them fall one by one type of storytelling. And on that note, strap in, because in classic Attack on Titan fashion, there's this scene right here. You know, just some generic horse riding filler as they all storm into Shiganshina, right? Nothing really important. Yeah, well actually no, because there's an ominous mound of dirt and a tube coming out of it. I am like pretty sure that Paradis doesn't have plumbing. Yeah, those are the people that Zeke would transform at the end of this episode. They didn't like magically appear. In case you were wondering what the Marley squad were cooking while we were carrying out casual coup d'etats, they were digging these trenches. I guess they're not really trenches, they're holes, but you get the idea. And in hindsight, this becomes even funnier because literally the first thing Erwin says right as we pass these tubes is Titans could be hiding in the shadows. Well, you see, Erwin, they're actually not in the shadows, they're just chilling underneath you. Oh yeah, and the same goes for Reiner, by the way, he's also under you. But there's also this right here. I have truly no idea what's going on with the background here because the scouts look beyond cursed. Their necks look like they're JoJo characters and there's like really weird clipping going on. Yeah, definitely cursed. What's not cursed though is this shot of the scouts soaring above the buildings while the horses continue running. And that transition we get into this sort of drawn planning mode is also really neat. Also, I usually babble on about these swiveling shots tracing a certain character, but this totally static shot going through the gates while a bunch of scouts zip all around is also so cool. Without a doubt, this is overanalyzing, but it almost frames the sequence as not some super skillful and hectic move, but rather this large-scale, calculated, and strategic maneuver that just keeps going. Another small detail that I love here is that we once again see Eren's hand very briefly shaking. Bro is low-key carrying the entire mission again. I think he has the right to be a little bit shaky. But my favorite bit here is absolutely the musical shift that we see here. We fade from that triumphant part of the ODM gear theme as the scouts re-enter Shiganshina to those slower strings creeping in as Armin notices the ashes. And this is what I mean by the breakneck pacing of this episode, because while Armin immediately says that they are here and that they are close, we don't even focus on that because the music keeps going and we just jump back to Eren who soars above the wall. This entire sequence is 1, an incredible achievement we've taken while Mario, and number 2, just an incredible payoff. But that is immediately subverted by us catching glimpses of both Reiner and Bertolt just watching. We finally made it to Shiganshina. As Eren himself says, the basement is just around the corner. But that victory is immediately ripped away, and oh boy, are we not prepared for what comes next. As an episode cliffhanger, this would be insane, but the fact that we are still in the middle of the episode is just something else entirely. And on that note, we hop on over to the eye catcher talking about the glowing ore. I'm a weirdo about these world-building details, I know, but I always enjoy seeing how fantasy stories incorporate modern or modern-ish technology in these more magical settings. Like, obviously, this is just a lantern, but we don't have like battery power or power in general, right? So instead, it is this super spooky special ore. And the same of course goes for ODM gear and the whole ultra-hard steel and the ice burst stone, etc. I think it's really neat how different authors incorporate this sort of stuff without breaking the overall vibe, if that makes sense. Returning to the episode, from this point on, I think the simplest way to summarize everything we see is just with, that was way too easy. And note the difference in music before the eye catcher to us again seeing that same sequence, but now it is dead quiet. Just like with the Reiner reveal atop the wall, this is the direction carefully managing our expectations. We know they are here, and we know they are watching. And so that sudden silence just constantly keeps you asking, because when will they pop out? This is anime. Most of the time, we expect music to accompany a climactic scene, and it's quiet. With every ticking second, that anxiety builds and builds because we expect something to kick in, but it never does. We explore that anxiety from a few different perspectives. Eren just can't accept it, thinking that surely it couldn't have been that simple. But Levi then cuts in saying that, so long as Reiner and Burrito are alive, they can keep plugging the wall a dozen times and that it doesn't matter. And that's sort of the thing. Going into this, we aim to finish the fight here and now, but everything we're doing is kind of a band-aid fix. Regardless of what happens, there is still an enemy that we haven't even really discovered. And of course, the basement would reveal exactly that. Also, there's the scene of Mikasa giving Eren her cloak, which always had me raising an eyebrow. This episode's narrative was about everyone hiding their faces. So naturally, you'd expect that if Mikasa were to take off her cloak, well, people could identify her. And everyone knows that she's glued to Eren, so Eren is probably going to get blasted somehow. But that never happens. Definitely a rare time where that Chekhov's gun is never fired. So an alternate interpretation I would offer up is that by plugging the wall, something that was supposed to be this triumphant victory, they actually inadvertently trap themselves within Shiganshina. So in other words, Eren does lose his wings of freedom. Regardless, definitely a slightly sus scene. But we then pop on over to Erwin and Dirk, where they too talk about how they would have expected an ambush by now. In a way, all of this is kind of a role reversal of Declaration of War, or I guess Declaration of War is a role reversal of this. But in both situations, the enemy knows that their enemy is right there, but we as the audience observe both sides. But what we don't know is what stands behind them and what we're even really watching. In the same way that Zeke appeared in Season 2 and then just poofed out of existence, the Zeppelin in Season 3 too appears and poofs out of existence until it becomes the reinforcements. The early parts of the final season are centered around Reiner, so in that case, Reiner is sort of Eren in the present story. It gets really confusing talking about like enemies knowing where their enemies are, but those enemies is Paradis, right? It's just that the final season is framed around Reiner initially, so it does get confusing with the whole Zeppelin sort of being Zeke, but I think you see what I'm getting at. That's the sort of guns on walls and letting the dominoes fall type of writing that Isayama constantly excels in with these sorts of climaxes. On the face of it, just like in the final season, we sort of know what's gonna happen, right? Like, the fact that Reiner and Bertolt is here is not even a mystery, it was literally shown to us. But at the same time, we also have like literally no idea what's gonna happen. It's just excellent direction both on the anime's parts as well as of course the manga itself. But it's not over just yet, because in the same way we'd have to solve the Yelena mystery in Declaration of War, we have the mystery of the cups with Armin. First of all, and I will repeat this every single time this is relevant, these poor souls don't have Coffe on Paradis. No wonder they kept getting destroyed by Marley. But okay, as much as I joke about it, there are good reasons to believe that the proliferation of Coffe in Western countries was a huge accelerator for societal developments. Before I say anything else, once again a disclaimer. I've taken a grand total of 1 anthropology course, so I'm about as experienced as Marco was in Trost. Conceptually, going from primarily alcohol, a depressant, fueled socializing in bars, to coffee houses where patrons are mostly sober and consuming a stimulant seems ideal for fostering debates and breaking down social barriers. That said though, it is still a somewhat contested point. There are plenty of cultures who have long consumed other caffeinated drinks, and it's not like they slingshot themselves into the Enlightenment or anything. But then again, those coffee houses were less so about the coffee or caffeine and more so about the environment. As in, no alcohol and random dudes just chatting about things, so it's purely a societal angle that doesn't really have anything to do with coffee, the coffee is just the conduit for that. In a way, we do kinda see that in Attack on Titan. Levi is a tea enjoyer, while, like Hannes, was very much not a tea enjoyer. But whatever the case, definitely interesting to at least think about. Armin then reports what he found to Erwin, and here, I think it's important to note that we obviously have some pretty strong information asymmetry between the scouts and us as the viewers. The scouts haven't seen the monkey in a very, very long time. There is good reason to suspect that the third person is Zeke, but there's really no way to be sure. We as the viewers, on the other hand, I mean, we've literally seen them interact. But this is Attack on Titan, so there's of course even more dominoes to be set up here. So as the music shifts into full-blown horror, they come to the conclusion that there must have been at least one more person if they had enough time to drop everything again in position.
It's possible that they had a scout in addition to the 3 on the wall.
With that in mind of yours, you've saved us from disaster countless times.
If you remember what I said about theorizing based on wrong information, yeah, this is the inverse of that. I think Armin jumping right to the conclusion that there must be 4 people is a pretty blatant Chekhov's gun. In hindsight, yes, we can confirm that it was indeed peak. But from a writing point of view, I think with this, Isayama didn't really want people to start wondering about some other means of communication or maybe more traitors or anything like that. Rather, he basically just gave us the answer right away. It's just a neat way to continue building and, more importantly, concentrating that suspense on what truly matters. The tangible threat of Reiner and Bertolt that we know very, very well. We've had plenty of suspense stemming from mystery, so this time we are going 100% in on what we already know, and that is scary. But even then, there's of course stuff that we don't know. More on that in a second. Erwin then tells Armin to focus on finding them, saying his mind has already proved invaluable. As with the entirety of the Erwin-Armin debates, many of these scenes tend to bring up some very, very spicy takes. And one that I've seen around this point is Erwin suddenly giving Armin authority and recognizing his brains apparently being super sudden. But I don't think this is sudden, like, at all. First of all, the Annie mission. That was led by Erwin, but Armin was the one actually doing everything. Secondly, back in Trost, we saw something extremely similar with Pixis. So in terms of big brains recognizing other big brains, this has been a thing since very early Season 1. And secondly, there is Erwin himself. He has always surrounded himself with extremely skilled people and delegated tasks that best fit their skills. I mean, that's exactly what makes him a good leader. Knowing how to allocate resources is like 85% of the job. He himself is relatively strong, but he is nowhere near Levi's level, and so Levi is his right hand, even if he was an outlaw. He is also smart, but he has nothing on Hanji, which is why he doesn't carry out any research himself. And so him delegating this task to Armin is also exactly that. Him noticing that Armin excels in this human-centric thinking that has allowed him to already lure out Annie, to largely confirm that Reiner was an insider, and now that they'd be hiding within the walls. And to cement that even further, Dirk asks whether promoting Armin is another one of his gambles. Only for Erwin to say that, no, I've already judged him. A big brain respects a fellow big brain. The point I'm making here is that I don't think Erwin promoting Armin is sudden at all, and I also think it is yet another point for Levi's decision later on. And there's another cheeky little scene here of us briefly lingering on the walls before we pan up and see them actually talking about where the enemies are. Just like the pipe sticking out of the ground, this is the show basically showing us where they are as they talk about where they are. And the Thunder Spears are of course also teased here. Though as they split up to search the perimeter again, doom sets in for Armin as he realizes that this is too simple. They know Marley is here, Marley knows that they're here, but they can't find them and they're not retaliating. There is something that they are missing on a fundamental level. And so we get these really cool shots of the world literally shifting all around as Armin spirals. We zoom out to depict him as the small speck hanging on the wall, but we then zoom back in and the world shifts 90 degrees. I think it's just a cool visual representation of Armin's headspace right now. And also, the musical contrast set up here with Armin spiraling to that realization setting in to him calling off the mission is also so cool.
なんで敵は穴を塞がれても出てこない。どうする？失敗したら僕らが巨人を知らないからだ。
But it's at this point where our glorious ballhead resorts to classic Attack on Titan information asymmetry battles. This is that crucial human variable that Armin simply beats Erwin out on. Erwin is a genius strategist and leader. When it comes to large-scale operations akin to Season 1, he is unrivaled. I mean, they captured Annie without even expecting her. But Armin's way of thinking is much more concentrated. If Erwin does a horizontal slice, Armin does a vertical, and analyzes every single layer of just one tiny sliver. If the Marley squad knows a lot more about the Titans, how to use them, and everything like that, it's no wonder they can constantly keep one step ahead. Thing is, we know there are Titans within the walls. It's safe to assume that Marley also knows that there are Titans within the walls. But what Marley doesn't know is that we know there are Titans within the walls. Because they were suspects, Annie was captured without Reiner and Bertolt ever knowing. And after the events of Season 2, I mean, obviously, they weren't caught up on everything that happened. So yeah, this is information asymmetry versus supposed information asymmetry. In this case, Erwin of course also faces the natural debuff of Armin having spent years with these people, whereas he doesn't really know them at all. Though a smaller detail I find really interesting here is how Armin breaks confidentiality. The Wall Titans weren't exactly made public, right? And so, we briefly focus on Erwin as Armin blurts out to check inside of the walls. In part, I think this is just because he realizes that Armin's probably onto something, but also because Erwin always holds his cards very close to the chest. So here he sees Armin largely gambling on 1, a very big secret, and 2, just a hunch that completely ignores traditional strategy. Based on what we had seen previously, the closest thing to this would have been Michi and his JoJo nose. So I think it's no surprise that Erwin immediately recognizes that this is the kind of thinking they need if they are to stay ahead of all of these new threats. In a perfect world, we'd of course have Erwin and Armin putting their heads together, but you know. For now, that human-centric profiling ability is exactly what they need. And speaking of, note that as Erwin shoots off the flare and gives Armin commands, we once again focus on Levi. Piece by piece, his decision is slowly being made. And so, we enter the climax of the first act. They find the cavity, Reiner pops out, and we get that classic shriek in the music as those dominoes come crashing down. Of course, this is Attack on Titan, so we break the anime rule, and with zero fanfare, Levi launches forward and sticks one sword in Reiner's neck and the other in basically his heart. Reiner's durability throughout this arc will be a huge point of conversation, so I won't get into that now. But obviously, taking 2 swords from an Ackerman and smashing down from like 40-ish meters is a real bad time. But yeah, more on that soon. You know what I'm talking about, we'll talk about it plenty. What we will talk about now though is Reiner's transformation, because the entire sequence is gorgeous. Even ignoring the Levi sequence, the transformation itself is so good. You really have to go frame by frame to catch all the impact frames and whatnot, but I love how we actually see the ground underneath pounded in as he begins to transform. And then when he pops his avatar states, I love how we see that Titan lightning sort of zip through his core a few times before it begins proper. And also the whole eyes lighting up, each getting bigger and then merging into a transformation is also super cool. I know a lot of people love the impact frames from like the wall sequence where we see their titans briefly, but I've always been a huge fan of when the animation goes minimalistic with that fuzzy look to it. And this is exactly that. I'm gonna have to keep stressing this because this is Attack on Titan, we know how these arcs are written now. So when we jump to Erwin, we get the actual reveal of this sequence. He screams to keep their eyes out, but without ever skipping a beat. We see lightning behind him, and then just one after another across the entire horizon. And like, with this sequence, what is there even to say? Obviously, on a first watch, I never noticed those pipes in the ground, and I certainly didn't expect like, literally everyone to join the battle in the very first episode of the arc. I think Erwin's reaction is kind of all of us, because like, 1 transformation? Big deal. 2 transformations? Very big deal. A dozen across the entire horizon? Yeah, I kinda don't even have a descriptor for that. You know it's bad when even Omega Brain Erwin can't keep his composure. And sure, they are just pure titans, but man, the way the entire sequence is framed just gives me goosebumps each and every time. But again, we keep on going, because as the vocals slow down, we see Z grab a boulder, and as there is that moment of silence, we move into the crescendo. These fights, and especially Liberio, are written like a dance, and I love it. The glowing eyes, the downright nightmarish glare of Zeke, peek in the background by the way, it's glorious. And that's not even mentioning the new mystery that is brought up by the fact that the Beast Titan seems very different from what we saw with Michi. Like, don't get me wrong, Michi was brutally torn apart, but there, Zeke seemed almost intrigued in him. Here on the other hand, like Erwin immediately deduces, they are trapping them inside with the singular goal of killing all of them. With Michi, the monkey was kinda smiling, he seemed kinda wholesome. Now, he is glaring at us with glowing red eyes. And on top of that, if you go back to the Reiner and Bertolt's looking out at something scenes, I don't think it's a huge leap in logic to look at the barrels Peak is carrying and already figure out that chances are that's where old Burrito's chilling. And this zoom out shot of the army of titans, it's so good. These are the kinds of scenes that just make me dream of a super high budget, super faithful live action adaptation at some point because, like seriously, imagine the Ride of the Rohirrim but with scouts and titans. It'd be so cool. But yes, in terms of kicking off a new arc, this episode is simply legendary and easily up there with my favorites in the entire Attack on Titan run. Going from marching over here to full-blown Titan army appearing in the space of 10 minutes was an experience that I'd give anything to live through again. But the episode is not over just yet, because we also get a new ED. If a lot of the previous ones have been super creepy or super foreshadowy, then this one is definitely up there with the saddest ones in my opinion. Most of it is about this longing for the past, about looking back and, in a way, giving up on their dreams. To only call each other's name, to only share each other's happiness, to trust only each other's words, to embrace each other's pain. It is a story of love, trust, and unity. It's a story of the Scouts, including Reiner, Bertolt, and Annie. A story of the times where the world was still as cruel as it is today, but everything was a whole lot simpler. But now that naivete has been ripped away, and we've lost so many along the way, all that remains are those singular picturesque moments captured in time. The entire ED are like pictures in an album harboring years and years of memories and feelings. And of course, knowing how this arc ends, the lyrics of "Somewhere in this world, if we can meet in the future, please don't forget about me, the truth about me," hit particularly hard. Obviously, there is the death of Erwin, but much more importantly, there is also the death of hope. upon reaching the sea, the truth of Eren would be gone. I think the ending shot of the empty dorms captures that really well. It's a visual representation of that sadness of we can never go back anymore. Those dorms, they are empty, and they will never be the same again. And also, if you recall the oddly empty locations from the OP, the ED sort of contrasts that. Because amongst the war-ridden destruction and the dead parody, there are these Polaroids of warm memories, with each and every one brimming full of life. And it's only the ending frame that is the empty dorm. Also, there is the shot of the classroom that I think warrants a wee bit of overanalyzing. First off, just like with the rest of the ED, there is of course that somber undertone that this is probably the best time of their lives. So, yeah, that's very sad. Numero 2, the tables all sit 3 people, but the only ones missing a third are Ymir and Historia and Reiner and Burrito. For Ymir and Historia, I think the missing piece is the real Ymir, while for Reiner and Bertolt, it is of course Annie, who is sitting as a loner. I guess there's also the possibility of Ymir just never allowing anyone else to sit with Historia, because, you know, that would kinda track. And speaking of, also note how Burrito is looking at Annie, because, you know, he has a crush. And also note how old Horseface is looking at Mikasa, because, you know, he has a crush. And Connie looking back at Marco, who is just babbling about something, is just funny goofy. But yeah, this entire ED is like the pinnacle of getting extremely sad by looking at happy memories. But with that said, that is episode 50. An absolute breakneck fast one, and we are only getting started, and that's not to mention that every episode after this is also just incredible. But alright, this video is long enough as is, and I am losing my voice. So next time, we are finally diving into the heart of Shiganshina and the absolute insanity it entails. So, I hope to see you back as we continue overanalyzing Attack on Titan. And that's the video. Pretty sure 40-minute videos are going to be the norm for this arc, so don't be too surprised if I happen to fall a teeny bit behind schedule. Starting to think that I might be nearing my 13 years because man, there's not enough hours in the week anymore. But anyway, with that, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest member of the team, Chris Ferguson. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my ramblings, so seriously, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!